Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Ethics in the Real World, Revised Edition, 90 Essays on Things That Matter, a fully updated and expanded edition, by Peter Singer, narrated by Julian. Introduction. We all make ethical choices, frequently without being aware that we are doing so. Too often we assume that to live ethically, all one needs to do is obey the generally accepted rules that begin with, "You must not." If that were all there is to living ethically, then as long as we were not violating one of those rules, we would be living an ethical life. That view of ethics, however, is incomplete. It fails to consider the good we can and should do to others less fortunate than ourselves, not only in our own community, but anywhere within the reach of our help. We ought also to extend our concern to future generations and to sentient beings beyond our own species, including non-human animals and, should we ever encounter them, conscious artificial intelligence and aliens. Another important ethical responsibility applies to citizens of a democratic society: to participate in the decisions our society makes. Many of these decisions involve ethical choices. In public discussions of these ethical issues, people with training in ethics or moral philosophy can play a valuable role. Today, that is not an especially controversial claim, but when I was a student, philosophers themselves proclaimed that it was a mistake to think that they have any special expertise that would qualify them to address substantive ethical issues. The accepted understanding of the discipline, at least in the English-speaking world, was that philosophy is concerned with the analysis of words and concepts, and is neutral on substantive ethical questions. I doubt that I would have continued in philosophy if that view had prevailed. Fortunately for me, at least, the radical student movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s transformed the way moral philosophy is practiced and taught. In the era of the Vietnam War, with other struggles against racism, sexism, and for a cleaner, safer environment, students demanded that university courses should be relevant to the important issues of the day. Philosophers responded by returning to their discipline's origins. They recalled the example of Socrates questioning his fellow Athenians about what it takes to live justly, and they summoned up the courage to ask similar questions of their students and eventually of the wider public. My first book, written against the background of civil and sometimes not so civil disobedience against racism, sexism, and the war in Vietnam, asks when disobedience is justified in a democracy. Since then, I've continued to address issues that matter to people outside departments of philosophy. Some academics still think that writing a book aimed at the general public is beneath them, and writing an opinion piece for a newspaper is sinking lower still. In this book, you will hear a selection of my shorter writings. Newspaper columns are often ephemeral, but the ones I have selected discuss enduring issues or address problems that are still with us. The pressure of not exceeding 1,000 words demands a style that is clear and concise. Granted, in such essays, it is impossible to present one's research in a manner that can be assessed adequately by other scholars, and inevitably some of the nuances and qualifications that could be explored in a longer essay have to be omitted. It's nice when your colleagues in philosophy departments appreciate what you're doing, but I also judge the success of my work by the impact my books, articles, and talks have on people who are interested in thinking about how to live ethically, irrespective of where they work or live. The average article in a peer-reviewed journal is, according to one study, read in full by just 10 people. An opinion piece from a major newspaper or a syndicated column may be read by tens of thousands or even millions, and some of these readers will change their minds on an important issue and may even change the way they live. I know that happens because people have told me that my writing has led them to stop eating animal products, changed what they donate to charity, or, in at least one case, to donate a kidney to a stranger. Beyond such anecdotal evidence, as I describe later in Can Ethics Be Taught, I took part in the first randomized controlled studies showing that what students discuss in a philosophy class can change their behavior outside the class. The essays in the opening section will shed some light on my approach to ethics, but it may be useful to say a little more here. Moral judgments are not purely subjective in that they are different from judgments of taste. If they were merely subjective, we would not think it was worth arguing about ethical issues, any more than we think that it is worth arguing about which ice cream flavor to choose. We recognize that tastes differ, and there is no right amount of garlic to put in a salad dressing, but we do think it is worth arguing about the legalization of voluntary assisted dying, or whether it is wrong to eat meat. Nor is ethics just a matter of expressing our intuitive responses of repugnance or approval, even if these intuitions are widely shared. We may have innate yuck reactions that helped our ancestors to survive, at a time when they were social mammals but not yet human. Those reactions will not always be a reliable guide to right and wrong in the much larger and more complex global community in which we live today. For that, we need to use our ability to reason. There was a time when I thought this kind of reasoning could only unravel the implications of a more basic ethical stance that is ultimately subjective. I no longer think this. There are, as Derek Parfit argued in his major work On What Matters, which I describe later in an essay entitled Does Anything Matter?, objective ethical truths that we can discover through careful reasoning and reflection. But for those who reject the idea of objective ethical truths, the essays that follow can be interpreted as attempts to work out the implications of accepting the ethical commitment espoused by many philosophers in different terms, and perhaps best put by the great 19th century utilitarian philosopher Henry Sidgwick. The good of any one individual is of no more importance, from the point of view, if I may say so, of the universe, than the good of any other, unless, that is, there are special grounds for believing that more good is likely to be realized in the one case than in the other. Sidgwick was a utilitarian, and so am I. Once we start to question our evolved and culturally transmitted intuitive responses to moral issues, utilitarianism is, I believe, the most defensible ethical view, as I have argued at much greater length in The Point of View of the Universe, written jointly with Katarzyna de Lazari Radek. Nevertheless, in the essays that follow, I do not presuppose utilitarianism, and some are written with a co-author who is not a utilitarian. That is because, on many of the issues I discuss, my conclusions follow from non-utilitarian positions as well as from utilitarianism. Given the practical importance of these issues, as a good utilitarian, I ought to aim to write for the broadest possible audience, and not merely for a narrow band of committed utilitarians. Some of the following essays address topics for which I am well known: the ethics of our relations with animals, questions of life and death, and the obligations of the rich to those in extreme poverty. Others explore topics on which my views are likely to be less familiar: the ethics of selling kidneys, or of growing genetically modified crops, the moral status of conscious robots, and whether incest between adult siblings is wrong. Happiness and how to promote it plays a key role in my ethical view, so that is the topic of one group of articles. Among the more personal essays is a reflection on surfing, which provides me with a refreshing break from thinking about the other topics discussed in this book. This edition also differs from the previous one, in part because the world in which it is appearing is different from the world of 2016. Of the 90 essays in this book, 37 are new to this edition, and many of these cover recent ethical issues, such as the genetic modification of human embryos, limits to freedom of expression, the ethics of artificial intelligence, extending the human lifespan, the lockdowns and vaccine mandates that aim to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, racism, and the riots that followed the murder of George Floyd, colonizing outer space, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has once again raised the risk of a larger conflict and even a nuclear war. Some of these essays have been grouped in a special new section, The Future, in which I address issues that I expect to become increasingly important over the next decade or two. Others are distributed throughout the book. This edition differs from the previous one not only because it has new essays, but because all of the essays, irrespective of when they were originally written, have been fully updated. So, for example, the essay on How Much Should Sex Matter was first written and published in response to the disqualification of Jenna Talakova from the 2012 finals of Miss Universe Canada because she was not a natural-born female. Now the essay follows the issue right up to the 2022 success of Leah Thomas, also not a natural-born female, in U.S. college women's swimming events.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?